Hello, this is Steven Hour, and today we're here with another top 10 video. Today, I'll be doing my top 10 favorite modern real-life gangsters. Now, we've already done a video on old school gangsters, you know, from the I guess, the early 70s and down. This will be the 70s and up. And to take into account, most of these guys are either dead. Some have very unique, interesting stories. Some of them are no longer in the organized crime. They've gone in other directions. And take into account, I'm basing purely on criminal notoriety, but at the same time, their story and where it's taken them. So without any further ado, before we get into the actual top 10, let's kick off with an honorable mention. The honorable mention here goes to Michael Franzese, the man of faith. Now the reason he's honorable mention, because he's no longer really a gangster anymore. And you want to know more about him? Hell, he has a YouTube channel where he does videos. I highly recommend you go and watch them. They're absolutely fun as hell. And honestly, he is just really great when it comes to these stories. Now, Michael Franzese is the son of Sonny Franzese, a notorious underboss within the Colombo crime family. He eventually rose to become one of their top capos and was really the mastermind behind an infamous tax scheme to rob the U.S. government out of millions of dollars in gas tax money. Eventually, of course, during the 80s, when there was a real crackdown on the mob in New York and pretty much elsewhere, Franzese was of course he made a plea agreement and was convicted of a crime that he did. He was sent to prison. But during his time in prison, he became a religious man of faith, and also with the help of the love of his life, I would assume, he turned his life around. He left the life. He didn't go into witness protection. He didn't rat. He just left the life and really became a man of faith, going to these young gangbangers and pretty much telling not just stories about his life, but also telling people, these young wannabe gangsters, to get out of the life. Now, whether you think he's real or actually, you know, turning his life around, or it's just a scam, despite that, I've always admired man for not just turning his life around, but also encouraging those to not go in that direction. Being in that direction, admitting his faults, admitting that he was a part of it. And the fact that he's turning his life around to be a better man is a really fascinating story that really everyone should know. So I give him an honorable mention, courtesy of that. He has a YouTube channel. Go and look it up. You'll have a great time. In the meantime, let's get on with the list. Coming in at number 10, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. This man was the underboss in the Lucchese crime family, one of the 5 in New York. The nickname Gaspipe, he got it for going around beating up people with the gas pipe. During the 80s, when there was a big mob crackdown, the boss, Tony Duck's Corolla, was sent to prison. Gaspipe pretty much rose to become a leading figure within the crime family. And from what I recall, he was sent to prison. I think tried to cooperate, but the deal fell through. Didn't, go all the way through. It fell. And if I recall correctly, I think he died in prison of COVID. I'm not entirely sure of his ending, but I don't know. He's a fun character that I saw in an interview a while back, and a documentary also a while back. He is a really interesting character. How he came from a background within the mob. I'm not sure if it was either father or uncle was a capo within the crime family, and I think maybe drank himself to death. I'm not sure if that's either him or an infamous cop whose uncle was a capo within a crime family. I'm not entirely sure. But also what makes him infamous was he was affiliated with these 2 NYPD cops who did hits for the mob, and personally did mob hits for the Lucchese's, known as the Mafia Cops. So that will forever be perhaps one of his biggest legacies. He's at number 10 because I think the notoriety is really not that, I would say, not that really grand when compared to others on this list. But hey, I enjoyed this man's story. And if you can, try and give it a watch. Coming in at number 9, Paul Castellano, boss of the Gambino crime family. Paul Castellano was the was the cousin and brother-in-law of Carlo Gambino, the boss of the family's namesake. During the mid to late 70s and throughout the early 80s, Castellano ruled his crime family with an iron fist. And he's all out now. He's not like a traditional gangster. Castellano is more of a businessman and a racketeer type. And arguably, he, although ran the family like a corporation, was trying to expand it, he also was partly would lead to the family's downfall in the long run. Why? Because he forgot that what made this thing survive. Again, he was a bit arrogant, never treated those at the bottom of the pole very well. He had problems with his family life in the long run. There was an affair with his maid. And the feds wiretapped his house for to get evidence during the infamous commission case. He was one of the most powerful figures in the New York crime scene at the time. And of course, like many godfathers who weren't that liked, caused problems for everyone on the street. Like many godfathers who are like that, he ended up not going to prison, but ended up getting assassinated in the mid-80s, and it became one of the infamous gangland executions in New York crime scene. And after that gangland execution, there's really been no real high profile until recently, when I was a gangland shooting outside what was the current Gambino crime family's boss. So yeah, the fact that unlike others, I think he's the most arrogant, well, not arrogant, but just the most unlikable for a crime boss. Even though Castellano chose him to be successor, it didn't go well with everyone. Some people liked him, some people didn't, and had a good affiliation with the Genovese crime family and their boss at the time, Vincent Gigante. Anyway, I find how he's not liked. Usually most bosses are, but hey, that made him different and stand out, so I give him the number 9 spot. Coming in at number 8, Joey Messina, Big Joey, better known as the Last Don. This guy was really the last. During the 90s, he took control of the Banana crime family and managed to keep it under the radar and have it thrive when law enforcement was going after the other families. The Colombos were having an inner turf war. There was instability within the Lucchese's, and the Genovese and the Gambinos were constantly on the radar of the FBI to take down their current boss. Joey Messina managed to help the family fly under the radar. He was also around during the Joe Pistone era when Joe Pistone was trying to really infiltrate the crime family. I don't think he had that much contact with Joe Pistone, aka Donnie Brasco. Didn't have that much contact. And I find it interesting how when he did some jail time, but when he got out, he managed to really fix the family and make it powerful and bring it back to have a place of power on the commission. And I say he's the last Don because, unfortunately, in the early 2000s, I think, he was arrested on multiple charges and was about to get the death penalty. Because of that, he did what no other mafia boss had done. He became a rat. The fact a mob boss, the boss of the family, became a rat, that's saying something. I mean, we've had underbosses, we've had consigliaries, even capos turn rat, and even soldiers turn rat, associates turn rat. But never ever has it been the main crime boss. When that happened, I think the old school code of loyalty and the code of Ormeta really died with him when he did that. So I put him at number 8 because he kind of changed that a proper boss can actually turn rat. So that's why he's at number 8. Coming in at number 7, Sammy Gallo, aka Sammy the Bull. Underboss and one of the most infamous turncoats in mob history. Sammy Gallo also has a YouTube channel. I haven't seen it, but from what I've gathered as a mob enthusiast, I'm not all my facts going to be 100% true. Sometimes it's misjudged, but Sammy Gallo rose to the top in the crime family and mostly was pretty much a key mastermind within the construction racket. And he would be closely tied to one of the most infamous mobsters in the late 80s and 90s, John Gotti, eventually rising to become the family's underboss. Due to wiretaps on John Gotti, where he was sort of, I guess you would say, threw Sammy under the bus, he became a mob rat. one of the most infamous mob rats actually in American history. He ratted out John Gotti and his consigliere at the time, and when he turned rat and informant, entered witness protection, the family was sort of stripped of most of its power and influence. And the fact that he was really one of the conspirators to assassinating Paul Castellano is really what makes him really stand out. Sammy is just really, when you think of turncoats, those in the mob that rat out their boss, you think Sammy really epitomizes that. And yeah, so he's an infamous turncoat. I had to give him a shout out. And yeah, I will admit, I have never seen really a proper episode of his YouTube channel. I will one day, but I don't know. I guess when it comes to who's more appealing to watch their videos, I always lean to Michael Francis over Sammy. I hear one day they're gonna do a mob sit down, like, oh, you know, as in an interview between the two. I so want that to happen one day, because that would just be fun. Whether it happens, I don't know, but hopefully it will. Anyway, coming in at number 6, Jimmy Bulger, aka Whitey Bulger, one of the most infamous Irish gangsters within Boston. He rose to the top and managed to essentially become an infamous gang leader, an infamous figure. What makes him interesting, out of all the gangsters on this list, he had a special relationship, a cooperating relationship with the FBI. With the help of the FBI, he managed, you know, to sort of help do away with a bit of his competition, and because he was an FBI informant, he managed to at least have some protection to operate and run his criminal enterprise for quite a long time. Eventually, when the jig was up, he eventually went on the run and was on the FBI's most wanted list for a very long time. He was eventually apprehended and sent to prison, and for what I heard, he died in prison after being shanked. I'm not sure if he is dead. I think he is. And the fact that I found him to be a very interesting character, how he had that relationship with the FBI to further his criminal operations, to essentially, you know, to almost destroy the mafia within Boston. This he also served in Alcatraz, where, if I recall correctly, he took like these special new pills, courtesy of like government trying to test these new steroids or whatever, this new medication, and sort of messed with his mental state. I heard that happen. He's also was a true rebel, and he really rose to the top, and it was a very cunning and even a very violent. In fact, some of these guys are very violent, and I think maybe out of all the people on this list, he might be the second most violent person on this list. Another person which we'll get to later. Anyway, at number 5, Vincent Gigante, aka the Chin, sometimes called the Odd Father or the Rogue. Unlike other gangsters who dressed in business suits or even looked like a gangster, Vincent the Chin was slightly different. During the 80s and even 90s, you would see this old man walking down the street, acting crazy, dressed in a bathrobe and looking like a homeless / insane mental asylum person. And that was the Chin's way to have the government get off his case, and did for quite a long period of time. Vincent the Chin was also, I think, perhaps one of the more smarter crime bosses on this list. You see, Chin got his big break in the early mafia days during the 50s as being a chauffeur and bodyguard to Vito Genovese. He went on to and sort of went on and became sort of Genovese's apprentice. You know, had this sort of like mentor relationship, and was the infamous mob assassin to kill, failed attempt on Frank Costello. After that, he eventually was sent to prison for, I think it was a bit of drug dealing, but during his time there, he got out and eventually rose to become the boss of the family. Also, he was smart also to what is called front bosses, such as he would rule the family, but he had someone to be the front boss, to really have the appearance that this guy was running the show while he was in the background. Something that's actually very smart. Of course, he was eventually apprehended, arrested, and convicted, and was proven that he was faking his mental state. I like how that's an interesting story, and really makes, I think, the Chin one of the more colourful and more fun gangsters on this list than I've ever had with others. He's really, and that makes him really interesting and stand out. Number 4, Frank Lucas, Superfly. During the 70s, the cocaine and the heroin trade, the drug trade in the 70s was at an all-time high, with the disco scene, and especially with black gangsters. In Harlem, one person would rise to the top of that chain. One of the most infamous drug dealers would be Frank Lucas. Another one is Nicky Barnes, but Frank edges him out. Frank Lucas is pretty much is a very infamous drug lord, and ran with I think most of his family in the game, like I think cousins, maybe a few brothers, and really ran and was really a large distributor of heroin, and really helped and was really partly responsible for the heroin epidemic within Harlem. As your average black gangster, straight from the hood, and he partly inspired the depiction of Neo Brown from New Jack City. And most importantly, the portrayal that Denzel Washington did of him in American Gangster all came from here. He is a really fun and interesting. I believe he's still alive, maybe not. But he is. I had to have a bit of diversity. Whitey Bulger was Irish. Most of the guys here are Italian. This guy is black, African American. I felt like I needed a bit of diversity and not focus too much on the Italians. And so I felt who better than give to him. He was eventually, of course, convicted, sent to prison, and was released. But at the height of his power, he was one of the most wealthiest drug dealers probably in the country, and was infamous and had an influence stretched pretty much to nearly major black organizations across America. Anyway, coming in at number 3, Nicky Scarfo, Little Nicky. This man is I'd say one of the most psychotic gangsters ever. He ran in the Philadelphia crime family. Eventually, he was sort of banished to Atlantic City to run their rackets, but eventually he managed to prove a big earner. Eventually, he went from pretty much what was a soldier, and then consigliere. Next thing you know, he became the boss. He's more psychotic, well, not psychotic, but very crazy, and did not believe in the sense of loyalty or honor. He was eventually, of course, sent to prison after going too far with certain things. He ended up in a gang war where his rival, Larry the Hunchback, was sent to prison, and he killed a rising star within the Philadelphia mob, a capo who was the son of the family's previous boss and was loved by most. But he felt that, because Nicky Scarfo had a big ego, he essentially had him rubbed out. Although he said for other reasons, he did it purely because he was jealous of his rising power. He was also, sadly, his downfall came, I think, was his nephew ratted him out and turned a government witness, resulting in Nicky Scarfo going sent to prison. When he was sent to prison, I think the mob changed. In the Philadelphia mob was no longer the same after Nicky Scarfo. It's a clear example that loose cannons can prosper in that life, but they don't last. Sometimes they don't last, but most importantly, if they get to that high power, then the organization really gives a bit of a shake, and that's usually not good. Coming in at number 2, Pablo Escobar, a notorious cartel kingpin. One of the most infamous names. He ran one of the most powerful and massive drug cartels. His name is infamous in Narcos, and the Narcos scene, like those DEA agents going up against them. He's the most infamous, and he is, of course, spreads some of the most, and he has one of the most powerful cartels. When you see, the mafia was always more structured and had a code of honor and loyalty. The cartels were more violent of the organized crime gangs. I think only really rivaled by street gangs and biker clubs. Well, for those biker clubs that are involved in organized crime. Don't think all of them are, but a good portion are. And of course, yeah. And he's just an infamous name. I had to give him, I will admit, I don't know that much about him, but he's so infamous, I had to give him a place on this list, and I thought the number 2 spot should be deserving, as there's one person I feel is a little bit more infamous, and I feel has a bit more notoriety than him. So, ladies and gentlemen, at number 1 is John Gotti, the Dapper Don. One of the most probably infamous names in the mob in recent history. John Gotti rose to the top of the Gambino family. Mostly, he started out in truck hijacking, and believe it or not, ran a Gambino crew without even being a made man. Yeah, no, he managed to do that, even though he was unofficial. He earned himself as an infamous player, and people always respected him because he wanted to be a gangster, and he wasn't ashamed of that. He eventually rose to the top to become the family's boss after orchestrating Castellano's death, courtesy of the fact he felt that Castellano shouldn't have been boss because he didn't pay that much dues on the street. He felt that his mentor, Neil Delacroix, should have been the boss. Eventually, after the assassination, he rose to the top to become the family's boss. Throughout the late 80s and 90s, he earned a few nicknames. The Dapper Don because of his fine dress suit, and the Teflon Don because he kept beating cases. He had this sort of aura about him. He was like a throwback to the Al Capone times, with this flashy gangster in the newspapers, magazines, and sort of had a likable quality in public. He was not just a tough guy, he was a guy like, when he was eventually taken down, he did his time. He didn't rat. He served his sentence. Sadly, he died behind bars, and he's often what people considered what really brought down the mob. Well, yes and no. It didn't help with him having such a high-profile aura, but he didn't brought it down. The RICO law was really led to the organization, or this thing of ours, downfall. That was really what brought the organization down, not Gotti, in my honest opinion. Anyway, so at number 1, I give it to John Gotti, the Dapper Don. And there we have it. That was my top 10 modern real-life gangsters. Do you agree? Who else do you think should have been on the list? Did I leave anyone out? Who's your number 1? Please write down your name, your opinions in the comments. And until next time, this has been the Steven Hour. Ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.